London Uncovered, as we are marching on to a new episode. And today we are talking about grieving for grief. Yes, when we are young, we are told good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. But when we grow up, we realize that not only good things happen to good people, but bad things also happen to good people. And then we go through grief. For grief is a natural response to loss. It's the emotional suffering we feel when something or someone we love is taken away. Any loss can cause grief, including divorce or relationship breakup, loss of health, losing a job, loss of financial stability, a miscarriage, retirement, death of a loved one, serious illness, loss of a friendship, etc. Research shows that grieving is a highly individual experience. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. How one grieves depends on many factors like coping style, life experiences, faith, and character. Healing happens gradually. It can't be forced or hurried, and there is no normal timetable for grieving. Experts suggest some steps to dealing with grief, and they are: 1. Acknowledge your pain. 2. Accept that grief can trigger many different and unexpected emotions. 3. Understand that your grieving process will be unique to you. 4. Seek out face-to-face support from people who care about you. 5. Support yourself emotionally by taking care of yourself physically, and recognize the difference between grief and depression. And one author puts it very beautifully: words seem so feeble in moments like these. Life is so precious, and death such a thief. The depths of your pain I cannot comprehend, but I'll stand alongside you in the darkness, my friend. Love is a bond that death cannot part, gone from your arms, but still held in your heart. So let's go and see what people have to say about it. Good morning, Peter.
Morning, Sanjay. Morning, everybody.
Tell us, what does grief mean to you?
When I think about what my own grieving was like, it didn't come out as tremendous sadness, obviously. It actually came out as tiredness. To me, grief means depression, lack of energy, low motivation. I looked it up on the NHS website, and they said that grief and depression are indistinguishable in their early stages, but the difference is that grief starts to get better.
So how does one deal with grief?
I don't think you can one can put oneself through a 12-step program of dealing with grief. There's a psychologist called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross who talks about stages of grief, denial and anger and bargaining. But she's had a lot of criticism from people who say, well, all my stages have got mixed up and it just doesn't work like that for me. I think the only thing you can really do with grief is really recognise that you are grieving. It's a huge unweaving of the psychological fabric in your brain that ties you to the person you love and long for. And every stitch has to be unpicked, and it takes a very, very long time to unpick that tapestry.
Peter, what message would you give to the world?
Everybody grieves. Recognise your own grief. Recognise that you may have been not grieving for certain things. Only through grieving will things get better.
Peter, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Good morning, Jamie.
Morning, Sanjay.
Tell us, what does grief mean to you?
Grief is love expressed in sadness. When somebody passes away or when their life is affected in some way and you feel that pain because you love them.
How does one deal with grief?
For me, I talk to God about it because it's God is a God of love, I believe, but also God knows what it is to grieve himself. Now this is fascinating and I believe totally unique to Christianity. We're standing in front of a cross and the cross is the symbol of God's love for the world. But we have to remember that on the cross Jesus died, the Son of God died, and the Father and the Son's relationship in that moment was broken. And so the Christian belief is that God himself knows what it is to suffer and grieve, which is phenomenal, I believe.
What message would you give to the world, Jamie?
I would say grieve well, because it's a sign that you've loved well. But also draw God into your grief, because he loves you and he wants to give you peace.
Jamie, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Thank you. Good morning, Marcus.
Morning, Sanjay.
Tell us, what does grief mean to you?
First of all, Sanjay, thank you for doing this today. Yeah, it's the 22nd anniversary since my dad passed away today. Grief is different to everybody. Yeah. In my father's case, he's suffering from cancer, and we actually had a chance to get ourselves ready for it because we knew it was coming. And it was basically a relief because he was suffering from cancer and wasn't having a great life. But grief is different to everybody. I've had a couple of friends recently of my own age that have passed away all of a sudden, and then that's such a shattering occasion.
So how does one deal with grief, Marcus?
Going on from where we were with my friends passing away recently, their children, young men and young women have asked me, does it get easier? No, it doesn't. Time means that you think about it less, but it doesn't make it wrong to cry. It doesn't make it wrong to scream, about the injustice of somebody being taken early. Grief is different for everybody, but yes, it doesn't get easier. You just think of it less every now and then.
What message would you give to the world, Marcus?
Be happy. Look on the bright side of grief. Yeah? Every life goes, new life comes. Yeah? New little babies. Yeah? Smiles on their faces. Thank you very much, Sanjay.
Thanks, Marcus. That was touching. Good morning, Nigel.
Good morning, Sanjay.
Tell us, what does grief mean to you?
Grief means it's one of these things that you're going to face in life. It's unavoidable. You're going to have losses. And grief is sort of like when you lose someone, you miss them, you're sad that they've gone, and it's good to grieve because it gets it out of your system. It's a natural thing, and yeah, it's like a release valve.
So, how can one deal with grief?
Well, it's unavoidable grief, but some people can deal with grief better than others. But I think that as it's unavoidable, no matter what way you deal with it, there's no right or wrong way really. It's grief is grief, and you've got to grieve for a loss, especially a close family member or someone that you really love. So it's a natural thing.
What message would you give to the world, Nigel?
I'd say if you lose someone, it is good to grieve, and it's good to remember them, and it helps you to get over that loss.
Nigel, thanks for sharing.
Thanks a lot.
Good morning, Chris.
Morning, you alright?
Tell us, what does grief mean to you?
It depends how you take it, really. It's all under individual circumstances. Obviously, if a loved one dies to you, they're there one day and they're gone the next, basically, and there's a gap that you need to fill. Certain people deal with grief in a lot of different ways, anger or anything like that. Some people it takes absolutely years to get over any sort of grief. But it's all down to how you deal with it personally, really, and basically, yeah, how would you deal with it personally, really?
So, how does one deal with grief?
There's a lot of things. I mean, you're obviously sad that maybe a loved one's gone, but sort of celebrate the life that they had and what they gave you in your life, and to just sort of treasure like the good times you had together, basically.
What message would you give to the world, Chris?
Same as my other videos, we just got to keep on going. And as I say, with grief and everything like that, we're all going to die one day. We've got to live each day like it's our last, really.
Chris, that was touching. Thank you. Good morning, Tom.
Morning, Sanjay.
Tell us, what does grief mean to you?
Grief is probably one of the most dreadful things that you can feel. I mean, I haven't experienced what I would say personal grief. But the closest thing I had, a childhood friend of mine, he died back in 2001, and basically he was stabbed in the back as he was walking home. And the weird thing about that night is I tried to ring him, my brother tried to ring him, and another friend tried to ring him. I think he changed his phone, we couldn't ring him. And the next thing we know, we found out he was dead. And then we went to his funeral, obviously, a few weeks later. I went to see his body, and for me, it was the numbness that I remember. Going to his funeral, I was just numb. I couldn't really experience any, I would say, emotion, because I couldn't believe that it had happened. And I know that grief affects people in different ways as well. So that's how I remember feeling it. I just didn't know what to feel. I didn't really feel anything. I just knew that he'd gone, and I knew that I couldn't really express my feelings outwardly anyway.
So how should one deal with grief?
I say that grief is one of these things, these feelings, these experiences that you can only express and feel on an individual level. So I can't really give advice on how you feel, but you should recognise it for a start, and try and talk to as many people as you can, personal, friends, family, to help you get through it. And that's the only way I think that you can really deal with it. Because if you try and deal with it on your own, it's too much.
What message would you give to the world, Tom?
In regards to grief, it's unfortunately it's an experience that everybody's going to have to deal with. You know, whether it be family members dying, you know, friends, close friends. So, you know, what I would say is try and get through it with other people's help, because that's the best way of doing it. And realise that you're experiencing a trauma potentially, and treat it as such.
Tom, thank you for your input. As we come to the end of this episode, and we've been talking about grieving for grief. Yes, we heard what people had to say about it. In 1969, psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross introduced what became known as the 5 stages of grief. The 5 stages of grief, she clarified that they were never meant to help tuck messy emotions into neat packages. They are responsible to loss that many people have, but there is no typical response to loss, as there is no typical loss. Our grieving is as individual as our lives. She put those griefs stages into 5 parts. Denial. This can't be happening to me. Anger. Why is this happening to me? Who is to blame? Bargaining. Make this not happen. And in return, I will. Depression. I'm too sad to do anything. And then comes acceptance. I'm at peace with what has happened. And we can see that recovery is a process that will be filled with good days and bad days. One way to approach healing and recovery is to take one day at a time. No wonder the Serenity Prayer is used in most recovery programs. And it says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking, as he did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. So let go and let God.